Hey everyone, it's Lisa from the blog farmhouseonboone.com, and today I'm going to be making sourdough einkorn bread. Now if you're brand new to my channel, my baby is here in the wrap, so if you're wondering why the situation looks strange, I've had people say that they thought all kinds of different weird things about what is going on here. There's a baby in here, he's sleeping, I can hear him breathing if you're worried about him, but no, he's good. So this recipe has been on my blog for a while. I have a basic sourdough einkorn loaf, but I felt like it needed a little bit of tweaking to be really better. And after I learned how to make sourdough bread with conventional modern wheat, I decided to apply a lot of the principles that finally gave me success on making that to the einkorn loaf. I was making them totally different before, and I decided to just apply a lot of those same techniques, just slightly modified to the einkorn variety. Now, after I go through the recipe, we'll talk more about why einkorn and why sourdough, but I'm gonna dive right into the recipe in case that is what you came for. There will also be a link down in the description box below for a printable version of this recipe, so if you just want to print it off and go, it's there. You can save it for later. So to start, I'm going to use a combination of all-purpose einkorn and whole grain. I got my all-purpose from Jovial. I did not actually realize they had these large 10-pound bags, so I bought that because I was going through the other ones too quickly. So the first step is to feed your sourdough starter about 4 hours or so before you go to make this bread. The key is you just want it nice and bubbly. So if it's a really warm day, it might take less time. If it's cold, it'll take more. It is currently cold, so I put mine on my stove with the pilot light, and it gets it to bubble up in about 3 or 4 hours. Now what I have here is almost an exclusively einkorn starter. Now if you watched my video where I showed you how I used my sourdough starter, I showed feeding it with all-purpose, but I do swap through often. And lately, after I ran out of unbleached all-purpose, I switched to einkorn. And so there are trace amounts of probably every flour I've ever used in here. But at this point, this is almost exclusively einkorn. It doesn't matter. You can use any fed starter as long as it is mature and bubbly. It can have been fed with any kind of flour. Now, of course, this won't be an einkorn loaf exclusively, unless it's been fed with mostly einkorn or all einkorn. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add 3.5 cups of all-purpose einkorn flour to my bowl. Now you could make this with exclusively all-purpose, and I imagine you could make it exclusively with whole grain. I've had best results with a combination of the two. It just gives it the element of being fluffier because of the all-purpose, but then I also like the color and flavor that the whole grain adds to it. Now after that, I'm gonna add 1.5 cups of whole wheat einkorn flour. Now you can buy whole grain einkorn flour from Jovial already made, or you can mill it like I'm gonna do here. I get my einkorn wheat berries from a company called Mock Mill. Now this is the same company that makes my mill. I actually just recently bought this. I've been wanting to buy it forever because my mill that I use to grind the flour is hidden away. And I found that actually getting it out of the cabinet and plugging it in was enough of a hindrance to keep me from using it all the time. So now I'm just keeping this out on the counter because it's beautiful enough to do so, and I'm finding that I'm using it so much more. You can find the mill and the einkorn berries, which come in all different sizes. Sometimes I buy 50 pounds, sometimes you can buy smaller quantities as well. I did buy a smaller quantity this time. At bit.ly/einkorn berries, I made a short affiliate link there for you to check out. Okay, 1.5 cups of the freshly milled flour. For you Mock Mill users, I had my setting on 3. Okay, next I'm going to add 1.5 teaspoons of salt. I'm gonna combine those things together with my hands and add in 1.25 cups of fresh filtered water. Now at this point, you can do the auto-lease, which is, if you're familiar with sourdough bread baking, where you let the flour absorb the water before adding the starter. I oftentimes just skip this step and go straight into adding my starter. So I'm gonna add a cup of my super bubbly sourdough starter. You're gonna get your hands dirty here, but that is a-okay with bread making. Now, you could use your mixer, but Einkorn does not like to be overworked. And so I'm not gonna get too crazy with the mixer, but that would make the job, this part of the job, a little bit easier. All right, now that this is all combined, I'm just gonna allow this dough to rest for about 15 minutes before doing some of the folding that I was telling you about. All right, the next step is to do folding. So this is something that really changed the game for me on my modern wheat sourdough loaves, is instead of just kneading it like I would normal loaf with yeast, doing stretch and folds really helps. Now, here's the thing. With Einkorn, you're not gonna get the same stretch because it's a different form of gluten. Now, this is the same property of the Einkorn that makes it more digestible for people who can't tolerate modern wheat. The different gluten structure that makes it not as stretchy. You're not gonna be able to do that window pane test near as easily with an Einkorn loaf. So to do the stretch and folds, typically what I do is I just flatten it out and then just fold it in on itself from all sides. And I'll just roll it over and shape it into a ball. Now I'll just put this ball back in my bowl, cover it with something airtight like plastic wrap or beeswax wrap, allow it to sit 20 minutes, and then repeat that exact same fold method again. I like to put this in a warm spot, either by the wood stove or on top of my stove with the pilot light, are both great spots. Okay, it's 20 minutes later, so I'm gonna remove, I can already see some bubbles forming. Remove this dough, do the exact same thing as before. If it's a little sticky, I found a good tip is to get your hands wet, and that'll keep the dough from sticking without adding additional flour. I also really use my dough scraper a ton when working with a stickier dough, which this Einkorn loaf will definitely be a bit more sticky than the standard modern wheat. I'm just gonna roll it back up, put the plastic wrap back on, put it in a warm spot, and revisit this in another 20 minutes or so. All right, after you've done 3 folds with your dough, you're just going to put some plastic wrap or beeswax wrap on top so it doesn't get dried out, and then put it in a warm spot and do the bulk ferment. So this is just where you allow the dough to sit in a warm place, undisturbed, and double in size. This could take 3 to 12 hours depending on how warm it is. It is currently 2:30 in the afternoon. I'm probably gonna let this go until bedtime, or until about, the kids are in bed, about 8:30. And then I will shape it and give you the rest of the instructions. So I'm just gonna leave this alone for about 6 hours. It's pretty warm on top of this stove, so it will rise more quickly. If it's super cold, you don't have anywhere warm to put it, you might experience it taking a little bit longer, in which case you'll wanna start it earlier in the day so that it has time throughout the day to rise. All right, this has been rising for the last 4 hours or so. You can see here that it has doubled in size. I'm gonna gently shape this and put it into a flour coated tea towel lined Banneton and into a plastic bag, like a Walmart bag or whatever, and then put it in the fridge overnight. Right, this was in the fridge overnight. It has been, what has it been? More than 12 hours because we had stuff we had to do this morning. And so it's really risen quite a ways. It's been about, I'd say 14 hours. I'm just gonna pop it out here onto my parchment paper. I have a cast iron Dutch oven preheating on 450 degrees in the oven. And I'm just gonna do a really simple scoring pattern. I like to, on my einkorn loaves, keep it simple, so I'm just gonna go right across the loaf. And now I'm just gonna get this in my oven on 450 degrees, 30 minutes with the lid on, and about 15 minutes with the lid off for browning purposes. All right, this came out of the oven beautifully. As I was testing my new version of this recipe, the first time I did a nice deep score. This time I did a little bit more shallow. I can't say I necessarily prefer this one. Either way, it works beautifully. The bread will open up and have that nice oven spring. The thing that really made the baking process a lot more successful and also allowed for the design to pop were, one, the combination of using all-purpose and whole grain. And then the other main factor was putting it in the refrigerator overnight. This is something I'd only previously tried with my regular sourdough bread recipe, but with einkorn I'd never done that. And I wondered if it would just make the results a lot better. And for me, it really did. I like doing it this way because you can start it one morning or afternoon, and then the next morning you have bread all ready to bake by letting it sit in the fridge. So to me, it's just like a nice flow and it works out really well. If you're brand new to einkorn, which I'm assuming if you clicked on this video, you're probably pretty familiar with why you would want to consume einkorn. But for those of you who are curious, einkorn is an ancient form of wheat, so it hasn't been modified over the years for certain growing practices, like wheat being at different heights that doesn't break as easy and having higher yields. No wheat that thus far is genetically modified, but it has been bred a lot over the years to have certain qualities. And the ancient form of the grain is just easier for your body to digest because it's something that your body can tolerate. It's something that it recognizes, and it isn't that really stretchy, nice gluten that you have with modern wheat. So it can be a challenge to bake with, but once you get the hang of it, it is just as rewarding and it ends up being even more delicious. There's just this depth of flavor that you find in an ancient grain sourdough loaf. This is definitely gonna be our go-to because it is now turning out with the same great results that I'm getting from my other recipe, only with the ancient grain, which I feel a lot better about giving my family. Right, well, if you wanna get the printable version of this recipe so you can print it out, keep it in your kitchen, you can get that on my blog, farmhouseonboone.com, search einkorn sourdough bread. I also have tons of einkorn recipes. So if you click on food from scratch and then the einkorn category, you will see that I have so many options. If you're looking for places to buy einkorn, make sure to check out bit.ly/einkorn berries. You can also find the mock mill there. That is my affiliate link to mock mill. I've been using them forever and I just now finally purchased the mill. It was quite an investment. So I had to think about it a little while, but finally I realized that just the added step of getting the mill out of my cabinet was keeping me from really using it as often as I'd like to. And now that it has a home on the counter, I'm using it a lot more often. So I love that. I can add whole grains to so many recipes and buy grains in bulk by doing it this way. All right, well, I hope that you enjoyed this video. As always, thank you so much for watching. I make 2 new videos every week on food from scratch, natural living in a handmade home. Thank you so much for stopping by our farmhouse.